stepping into the inspirations that are given to us by God are some of the most vulnerable things that we can possibly do.
Hey there, Kingdom Builders. Welcome to an exciting new journey that's all about igniting the sparks of purpose and fanning them into roaring flames of impact. We're your hosts, Britley and Ellen, and we're absolutely thrilled to introduce you to our brand new podcast, Fan into Flame. Here we embark on a journey that uncovers the secrets, the insights, and the genuine experiences of experts who have not only identified their calling, but have fully embraced it.
So buckle up, dear listeners, because every episode is going to be a dynamic journey of wisdom, passion, and revelation.
This is Fan into Flame, the podcast where purpose takes center stage.
Hey there, Kingdom Builders. Welcome to episode 4 of Fan into Flame podcast. Today we're interviewing Keyen Lage, a former NFL athlete and model turned performance coach for highly successful high achievers. The cool thing about Keyen is that he has spent different seasons of time coaching both high performance men and high performance women, and through that journey, he's been able to see a sneak peek into both sides, which allows him to be an incredible bridge in Polarity, the art of how men and women relate to each other. So today we've been able to ask him questions all about the masculine and the feminine, and also what it takes to be a high performance coach. One thing you'll notice about Keyen is he is no bullshit, and we love that. We are here for that. He tells it to you straight, and that is something that highly successful people need. Enjoy the podcast, and as always, give it a rating if you love it, and send us a message and let us know your thoughts.
Today, as always, we're interviewing a heart-centered leader who is on purpose and on mission to build up the kingdom one move at a time. Keyen, we are so grateful to have you on here. Thank you so much for enlightening us and enlightening all the people that are going to be listening. I think that there's going to be a lot of good content and information and wisdom. And I actually know that for certain because I have been following you for so long. And what happened was I was going through my messages. I saw your message, and 2 years ago or something like that, I was like, one day when I have a podcast, I want to have you on. And the other week I was like, well, we have 2 podcasts now. It's time, Keyen. It's time to come on. So now it's Britley and I asking you a bunch of questions.
We're so excited. I'm particularly excited about this conversation because there's a lot in your story. Obviously, I didn't play football, which we'll get there, but there's a lot about you and your youth that you described that I resonate with. Being a high achiever, self-motivated, like laziness was not the issue for me. It was the overdrive, right? So I'm excited to get into your story. But that being said, you have an epic story from being drafted by the Chiefs and now an emotional intelligence coach for just high performers like yourself. So how did we get here? Like, walk us through the journey just a little bit.
Yeah, it's been quite the path. But first, I'd like to say I'm very excited to be here as well. I think I can feel you guys are going to be really good with pulling a lot of good things out of me. And I love when people are capable of doing that and do that. So I'm excited to hear what ends up coming up in regard to the questions that you ask. And I'm excited to ask whatever questions are there. So there's no limit to the questions. And I hope we can get a little in-depth and personal with them, which I'm sure we will. But in regard to my story, I never was drafted. So I was undrafted, but had a tryout with Kansas City and did well enough to be able to get a call back to be able to get signed when there was an injury. So I got called back and was told shortly after I got my MRI from a physical that I had to do from a previous injury I had in college that I didn't pass the physical and that I'd never be able to play again due to the capacity that I had to become paralyzed if I would have played. So as quickly as it came, it went. So within 24 hours, the best news and worst news of my life. Shortly after that, I realized I wanted nothing to do with my finance degree. There's no way I was going to sit in an office. So I ended up reading a book that was recommended by me by a mentor of mine at the time called The Biology of Belief by a guy named Bruce Lipton. And he talked about the science of being able to create your own heaven on earth. And that fascinated me. And I said, well, what would that look like for me to begin the process of doing that separate from this career that I had that since I was 10 years old, I said I wanted to do. And so that was being a personal trainer. I knew I wanted to help people in some capacity and I wanted to be able to create that life for myself. So I figured personal training was a good outlet for me to do that. So I jumped into that. From there, moved to Florida, worked as a personal trainer at Equinox, got really obsessed with the internal health side of things, created a program for people with autoimmune conditions and digestive disorders, quit at Equinox, scaled that online, moved to Colombia, traveled around the world for the last 3 or 4 years, and have since doing the online stuff with the internal health stuff. I've segued into all mental emotional work with people. I've worked with many different kinds of people at different seasons of life, depending on what I'm most excited about during that season will determine the type of people that I work with. And I'm now back in the States as of 2 years ago, and moved to LA, then back to Miami now, which is where I reside and have a practice here, and really trying to build that up here.
What a journey.
Seriously.
Like, what haven't you done? It's
Yeah.
pretty epic. This is amazing.
Tried a lot of things.
You know what I
People
love?
would not anticipate me
I
trying.
love the last sentence. You're like, I work with those in which are lighting me up in my current state. So you didn't pick this path with this attachment to having to stay with it forever, but rather reflecting where you're at in life and who you can help and serve right from there, which is like the energy that I get from you right away is authenticity. Before you said I'm an open book, I knew this about you. I'm like, this guy is open to speak and to speak truth. And I admire that about you. And so who is it that you're currently, like, who are you currently? What is this chapter of life called? Who are you? Yeah. What are you embodied as right now? And who do you love to serve today?
Yeah. Well, thank you for the compliments. I do my best to operate in that way. I think I can do that because I'm not really scared. There's nothing that I can say that scares me. I don't have a lot of things deep down that I'm afraid if they came out that they would ruin me. So I think that helps with making peace with a lot of our shit internally, with being able to talk more freely. Right.
Really,
That's
have you always been that way, or is that like a new learned before you answer the next? That's interesting.
It's definitely something that's been learned for me that I've practiced. So I want to talk more freely. So I try to operate as in integrity as possible so I don't have to remember shit that I told people, because that's really energy consuming, and also dealing with my own shit. So I'm okay with telling people about stuff. It really allows for me to consume, or I should say, release more energy. I can be more fluid and less resistant. But the people that I'm really inspired to work with right now are very, what most people would consider highly alpha men that on the outside look like they're absolutely crushing it, because they are in a lot of ways, but emotionally not very regulated. So they have built an incredible life around them where they might have the woman or women, they might have the job, they might have the lifestyle, but the quality in which they're living that relationship, or the quality in which they're operating that business or have their friendships, is lacking. Not from the average standard, but from the standard that they would like to exist from within themselves. So it's a 1-degree problem that I help these men solve, where the problems that I work with them wouldn't even be in the conversation if I was working with the average person per se, because of the level of the problem, the minuteness of the problem, where most people would be like, how is that a problem? You shouldn't be complaining about having, this incredible woman in your life that you have to deal with her shit, right? Like those kinds of things. So it's men that most people on the outside would think, okay, they're absolutely killing it when they are, but they want to solve their 1-degree problems. And I'm the guy to come to for that.
When you're working with people like that, where do you see that combination of not feeling really fulfilled and happy, and also taking time to break into that emotional intelligence part of them? So like when you're coaching, that's the first question. Do you notice that it takes some time for them to actually root into their heart? And do you think that that's correlated to their ability to have true fulfillment in their life?
It definitely, to answer the second part, it definitely, if they can't tap in and access it, it's preventing them from accessing deeper levels of fulfillment for sure. But what determines their ability to tap into it is how quickly I call them on their mechanisms that they use to not tap into it. So I think I've gotten pretty good now in the way of identifying the things that people do that prevent them from tapping in, all the different mechanisms that their brain uses to not have to. And so I think that's what a lot of my clients appreciate about me, but also find it maybe a tiny bit annoying, even though they love it because they get results, that I'm able to just call them so quickly on the things and the mechanisms that their brain is using to prevent them from going there.
And I nerd out on Polarity. Your Polarity content is incredible. And I think one of the reasons it's especially strong is because, unlike most people, you had a season of life where you were specializing in dominant women, right? Alpha women. What did you learn in that season, and what made you transition to men?
Yeah, so my initial intent was to understand women at a much deeper level, to be able to then take back to men. I've always loved working with men, but during that season, it was important for me to understand women at a much deeper level. And that was dating as well as the women I was working with. So that was the primary intent with diving deep into that. But I could serve those women because I went through a season after football got done where I became hippie Keyen. So I went from a 235-pound NFL linebacker to a 185-pound hippie with long hair that loved doing yoga all the time. So that was my opportunity to integrate a deeper level of the feminine, which was a little more flow, a little bit more just doing what I feel like doing, not what I should be doing or what's necessary for me to be doing. And so a lot of the women that I worked with that have always operated in this more highly responsible, driven place where they're always doing what they are supposed to do and should be doing to be as successful as they can, to not have to really depend on anybody else, or not because they don't know how to depend on anybody else. I was able to show them that deeper level femininity that I'd integrated that they hadn't yet. So it was cool to be able to do that and help them walk through that process of all of their fears associated with being dependent, especially on a man. That space that I create, they have to do what they're most afraid of doing, which is trusting and depending on a man to guide them into a place of stepping into what they really want and desire for themselves, because most of them are exhausted, which makes perfect sense. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, like, give a tangible example of this, if you will, because part of our mastery is bringing unity to women, the masculine and the feminine, the dance. And I get it with a woman, right? But with my male clients, I start to tell them that they have a feminine side, and I already feel the like, I don't know, you might have lost me right there. But I'm like, it makes so much sense as to why you resist this language. But let me try to elaborate in what that means. So as a man, that's an alpha man, but you have this ability to dance in union between the two. And I, like, from what I know of you, you have found a really decent harmony that probably allows you to go really deep in relationships with strong discernment around who you want to spend time with. What does the feminine side of you look like for the man? So we can just debunk, because he's freaking out. He's like, I don't have a feminine side, not me. Some men, right? Typically, before they're introduced to this idea of polarity, like, describe in your words what that means and how it shows up tangibly in your day, your week, your life.
Yeah, so it saves me so much of the time, because the feminine side, it helps me understand situations more clearly, so I don't have to use or spend energy in my masculine of driving towards something that actually isn't what's right or necessary for me. And so oftentimes what happens with excessively masculine men is that they know how to drive forward and they move forward and know how to work, but they're not aware that the thing they're moving towards or working for so hard for actually isn't something that's truly aligned with them. So because their radar within their intuition is so fucked up that they're only just moving forward. It just move forward, move forward, move forward, move forward, move forward, move forward. And what they don't realize is they're building a castle off of such a weak foundation, because they don't truly know, because they're not tapped into their intuition or their deeper sense of connection within themselves, what is the type of furniture that they really actually connect with the most, what color of house they really want the most, because they're just so focused on building the house and getting it done that by the time the house is done, they're not going to realize that they're going to be incredibly unfulfilled if they haven't already gotten to that point, because the house they built wasn't actually the house that was truly aligned with them.
It's like, what's that metaphor? You're climbing the wrong ladder, or you're climbing the ladder and it's up against the wrong wall, and you get to the freaking top and you're like, oh my gosh, I've been climbing this ladder up against the wall of what I thought was success, but the whole time disregarding my intuition and what I want. That's perfect answer. I need every man to listen to this, because it's so important. Can you imagine the level of fulfillment when you're in tune with because every man wants to shift an identity. That's why they go to these masterminds and they get in this raw analytical state where they're so stimulated. And it's like, yeah, you can build that identity from there, but what about like the true intuitive identity and connecting from there? It's such a difference, and you can really start to feel it and see it and witness it in these high achievers that are just on the fast track to success, versus like that true embodied state of like, this is what I want and why I want it. Also being connected to God and his purpose for them, right? So that's awesome.
Yeah,
I've just kind of seen it like you can see a man who has a strong balance in the dating game, because a man who's only in masculine energy and has suppressed his feminine, he'll just go up to a woman and make his shot, like shoot his shot, versus a man who's in balance will read her, he'll dance with her, like he'll feel into it, and he's able to do that because he's tapped into that side. Do you agree with that?
absolutely, for sure. A guy that's way too deep in his masculine definitely can be rigid, because he's just thinking accomplish task, get task done. What is the fastest way to get this task done? Well, that would be to do this and talk like this and go here. Right. So he's operating in a way of, how do I get from A to B as fast as possible, instead of saying, well, what's the most efficient way of getting from A to B? And normally that's, with a woman especially, being able to tap in and feel into yourself as a man and being able to navigate the space of both of your emotions. And that's how you're truly going to get to that B spot, not from trying to impose his will upon it.
You speak, I'm going to pivot just a little bit, because you do speak so much on the importance of hiring a coach. You're so vulnerable in that you have hired a coach in almost every season of your life. I think I heard you say you'll never not have a coach, which we couldn't agree more. And you've had you've had so many different levels of coaches, but what do you believe why do you think it's the most necessary component of growth, and how do you choose who you're going to work with and hire as a mentor?
Well, I'm intentionally not working with a coach in this season of life. life. So I have been for a while, but for the last year and counting, I'm not sure when that'll end, I'm not. So I feel like I'm incredibly tapped in and do not feel it's necessary. I want to push myself and stretch myself to see how connected I am to that voice that exists within me. And I feel like it's really clear right now. So I'm just riding that, not trying to impede on that.
Yeah.
But as far as what I did with the coach that I hired 4 years ago that I worked with the most was he was someone that had what I wanted. So naturally, I felt that he'd be a good fit. And I had a lot of belief in him and his ability to do work with me. And so I think the combination of having someone that you believe has done some element of what you'd like to do or have, paired with a deep admiration and respect, so you're receptive to them, is the proper criteria to look for when you're looking for a coach.
I think that's such a sign of growth that you're so in tune that you're like, actually, it's an integration phase right now, in which if I were to try to outsource one more time, I'd probably create more noise and dilution of self. And so this is actually not a season of that. Like, I think that's a very, like, again, the balance of the feminine approach of like, actually, this is the season of integration. Is there anybody that really inspires you that you look up to today? Or do you feel such fulfillment that you're like, I'm okay, I'm good?
In regard
Besides
to
me.
how I'm able to drive forward, say that again.
I said, besides me.
Right, exactly. No, I'm so connected. I'm so connected that it's so clear, like what I need to do, the things that are showing up in my life. Like it's so fucking clear that I know who I am and where I'm going.
What do you need to do? What do you feel like you're here to do right now?
Whatever I want to do, that's it. Huh?
I said, say more.
But that's really it. It's whatever I feel most inspired to do is what I'm here to do. I don't feel obligated to change the world. I've spoken about this before. I don't feel like it's necessary for me to have to do that, or it's my role to do that. It's my job to continually stay up to speed with what I'm inspired to do and who I'm inspired to work with, if I'm inspired to work with somebody or not, but not to fulfill any type of role to the world at all. And I think oftentimes people find themselves doing that, which is cool. That's just not me, because I think attaching to a purpose, like a long-term massive purpose, can disconnect from more short-term seasonal inspiration. And I more so just like to stay up to speed with the short-term inspiration that I experience, because I think that's actually a more efficient way to be able to create the biggest impact, instead of focusing on a big picture all the time, just setting that strong intention for that desire I have in my heart to impact people, and then just to figure out what's in front of me. Because sometimes there's necessary seasons that I have to go through that I'm not impacting people. And I've had that multiple times, where I'll spend a season going and doing a fight in Thailand. Or when I first moved to Miami 6 years ago, I was a stripper for 3 months, where obviously I wasn't helping anybody.
Well,
Just in different ways. Just in different ways. Just in different ways. But also another season, I did underwear modeling in Colombia for 2 months, where I took off work completely. So I have to keep up to speed with the short-term inspiration, separate from my deep desire to serve and help people, to actually serve and help people at the highest level.
That was the little nugget. That was so good.
the nugget. Okay, so you talked about being connected. Perfect segue into the most important person that is in the room right now, which is God. You've mentioned God plenty of times in other interviews and content. So I'm so interested to hear, what has your journey been like from the beginning to now? How has that evolved, and where did that start?
That's a good question. It started as a more Christian version. I grew up Christian, not Catholic, more Protestant, non-denominational. And through high school, I taught Sunday school. In college, I also was involved in stuff with the ministry, because I did really feel connected to something beyond me, and that's what I grew up with. So naturally, I would gravitate toward that. But when I finished with football and I got to Miami, is when I really allowed myself to explore deeper levels of doubt that I had within Christianity. And for the most part, I believe a lot of what the Bible talks about and preaches. And I think there's a lot of incredible metaphors for life, and there's a lot of wisdom within it. But the fundamental piece that I could not get on board with was the idea that the only way to achieve some level of eternal life, or whatever that means, is through Jesus. And that just never, it just doesn't make sense to me how that can be true and how everybody else is wrong. And now I think a lot of people might talk about this, but the pure fact that I'm damned if I don't believe that Jesus is the savior of life, I could never get on board with, and never will. And so it took me a little while to really be able to be okay with that. I was scared for probably 5-6 months. Like, fuck, am I fucked? Like, because I'm allowing myself to disconnect from this, like, am I fucked? And it really shined a lot of light on me in regard to that process I went through from disconnecting from the faith in that way. And so I did go a period of time where I was praying, but didn't have a direct relationship with Jesus being the savior of all of it. And I even went through a period of time where I disconnected from God entirely as I don't want to say a project, but like a test on myself to really go to that place of nothing, like nothing is there, and like almost impose that upon myself. And then whenever I wanted to pray or turn to God, I forced myself just to feel whatever I was feeling and to actively process it myself. So instead of initially jumping to God to say something to him or speak to him, I would just feel into what I was really feeling and process it that way. And through going to the depths of there being nothing and nothing matters and nothing exists, I found that it was a little bleak. And so even if that is true, which I don't know, even if it really is nothing that happens on the other side, that's not the most optimal way to live as a human, is to think and function like that. Like it's not. And so I felt like I got to a position where I'm like, okay, well, if that's not, then what is the way for me? And it's choosing to believe in something that's bigger and more grandiose than myself. And through that, I'm able to maintain a certain level of humility. I don't believe I am God. I don't believe that I'm the same as God. I believe that knowing that God exists through me and that he does have a greater purpose for me within myself, and that's spoken to me through my micro inspirations that come in to my heart, it keeps me humble in the way of knowing how I fall short of being able to take those actions that I know I need to take. I'm able to take a lot of actions relative to the average person, but it's so clear to me what some of the massive actions I need to take are. My human element kicks in, and I'm sometimes lost in my own emotion and not capable of fully taking the massive action I know I need to take. So now having that relationship with God where my humbleness comes from knowing I fall short and being able to take full action on all the inspirations that he's communicating to me all the time. And through keeping that channel open of communication with him, which I think is what I help people do basically, is opening that channel of the real true inspiration that exists within them, I will not be forsaken, and I will be, I think, entitled to all of the fulfillment and also riches of the world.
Yeah, we're all like, whoa.
That was a lot. I've been through quite the journey with all of it. I've explored a lot of the depths of the nothing and getting all the way back to a deep, deep connection with them. So.
Well, I appreciate that vulnerability, and it's important to see every side and for people to hear every single side, right? Like all the dynamic, the part where you questioned him and questioned this, and then you've rediscovered this. And we obviously are deeply rooted in faith, and we have one set of beliefs and something that resonates and works with us, but just to say that the relationship with him is one size fits all is limiting. And so I think it's important for people to be able to hear like the whole journey. Like what I like about you too is like when you were coaching women, you were there all on board to coach this woman, but you also had this intention of learning about a woman. When you disconnected from God, you wanted to learn about yourself. So you never go into something with like this kind of radical, like, I don't know, just, recklessness, I guess, is what I'm looking for. Like it feels like everything you do is deeply rooted in an intention.
But you know what's really weird? Like you could say that looking back at everything, but I've learned that this is how I've kept up to speed with a lot of my inspirations, is that my inspirations don't have to be justified and they don't have to be explained. And so sometimes explaining and getting too deep into the why before I allow myself to step into it just dilutes the inspiration. And so like you said, on the outside looking in, it might seem like I have had a ton of intention with everything that I do, but that only happens in hindsight. And to be honest with you, I couldn't make up this shit. I couldn't tell you that I would do these things to get me the results that I get through my conscious mind. There's not a chance. So it's more me getting out of the way and being open to receiving the inspiration and not having to justify all of it in the moment, which then inevitably leads to an incredible understanding afterward. But the understanding doesn't normally come fully until I go through it. I didn't know that fully about it until afterward, where I'm like, it makes perfect sense. Holy shit. So most of my discovery from my intention comes after I step into the inspiration, not before.
And you're open to this idea that everything could completely change, right? From now into like 2 years from now, like your perspective and what your truth is right now today. And this is more of a question, could ultimately change. And in 2 years from now, we can be sitting on this podcast and have very different answers and posture to what it is that you believe now. Or do you feel like once you come into alignment with this truth, that's where, does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm absolutely open to it changing and open to it not changing as well, for sure.
We interrupt this episode for a brief intermission. That intermission is brought to you by us. Earlier in the episode, we talked about Held, our group program. So if you are a woman of faith and you own a business, we invite you to get curious about what's available with Held. Held is your opportunity to tap into your feminine energy, find your flame, and let it roar. It's a 4-month program to go from scattered to streamlined and expand your capacity for growth, abundance, and connection. This is a program where we cover practical tools like structure, time, organization, having a plan to go after your purpose, as well as all of your internal tools like feminine energy, embodiment practices, breath work, nervous system mastery. It's Britley and I coming together, 2 coaches in one package, and it's our opportunity to offer women everything that they need to feel equipped to go on their journey and lead others in absolute conviction for what they have been called to do here. If you would like more information on that, message one of us on Instagram. Our handles will be in the show notes below, and feel comfortable to come with absolute curiosity. And we are happy to jump on a call to answer any questions you have and to make sure that this is the right fit for both of us. We love y'all so much. Enjoy the rest of this episode.
Is there a process that you could give the listeners right now? No pressure, just kidding. Like a live process, something tangible that someone could use right now if they are, I don't know, maybe they're like, gosh, I live up in my head. I don't really, I like what these guys are talking about as far as connecting to the heart, that intuitive place, that space of like pure essence and authenticity. That sounds great. And I think I get there sometimes, but to root there, to operate from there, to decide from there, to build relations from there, I don't know what that looks like. Like, what is a practice? I don't know. Is there one that you could take Ellie through right now? Just kidding.
Here we go. Here we go.
Or
If
that you,
if y'all are open, I'm willing to do whatever. So
let's do it.
if there's something in particular with you both of it as individuals, let's go there.
I love that. I think we should. I think the listeners would love a real example of an experience that you lead your clients through to drop into head heart coherence. So we're open.
Yeah.
Are you going to hypnotize us?
Yeah.
Just kidding.
Let's just say you're not already hypnotized.
I like it. What I don't know what
Yeah.
like whatever toolbox you want to use. Throw it out at us. We're ready. Oh, this is it. It's the silence.
Ellen,
Yes.
keep your eyes closed. If there's one thing that you feel like you can receive from me in this container today, what do you feel like it could be?
The truth about the depths that you're able to feel and receive wisdom.
What do you mean the truths?
Yeah, just getting to know who you are and how you've come through the process of being able to see life the way that you see life.
So you're redirecting it back to me would benefit you.
So I can know you deeper.
Why do you want to know me deeper? How does that help you?
I'm curious. I have a playful curiosity to see people deeply.
So do you guys want to make this about you, or do you want to make it about me?
I think making it about equal is how everybody feels it and locks into all of us at the same time when they're listening to the podcast.
Okay, so I'm assuming that there's something that you feel that I will say that will resonate with you through me sharing my own experience within that would help you.
Maybe.
Okay, then why don't we do this? Ask me the first thing that comes up inside of you.
The first thing that comes up is knowing whether or not it was difficult before you realize your gift to see life so differently and to receive so much wisdom from God and to feel things so deeply, probably more than the average person.
Yeah, you can open your eyes now if you like. It makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable because I don't see myself in that way all the time. And I think being and going through a lot of tension and not immediately ejecting myself from it is part of what's given me the ability to receive the guidance that I have. And stepping into the inspirations that are given to us by God are some of the most vulnerable things that we can possibly do, because they bring up our biggest and deepest insecurities. They always will, whether that's a relationship or something we find that we think is our purpose. Things that we're very emotionally invested in tend to bring up the deepest level of insecurity within us. So committing to the path, our individual path, is one of the most painful things I think that we can do, or that I have done. because of what it's brought up in me. It's caused me to dig up all my deep shit that I've had to overcome to step deeper into my path that I feel is designed for me. So by being willing to not eject myself from the path and going into the tension associated with the actions that I'm told to take is what allows me to develop a certain level of groundedness that really comes from going through a lot of tension and being willing to sit in the tension long enough to be able to receive the outcome that's supposed to come from it. But I think most people, they struggle with sitting in tension. They don't like to be in the discomfort of tension associated with taking action toward what their heart desires. So they're either completely disconnected and don't experience that much tension because what they're doing isn't that close to their heart. So if it's for like money, if it's for some other reason that's not from their heart, it doesn't tend to be as difficult. So they're either doing that or they are connected to that place within their heart and they're not capable of sitting in the tension long enough of fully committing to what it is that they're being told to do. And so for me, I feel I have a rare combination of both. Now, where my ability came from to be connected to that place, I don't know. I feel like I've always had a deeper sense of that guidance within me. So that might be a gift that I've always had that I'm now just really speaking out on. I think I was able to use it in my time with playing football. I was a 2-year captain and in high school and college. So I was always in positions of influence in that way. So I think I've always been demonstrating the gift, but being intentional about it and putting it out to the world as being my gift, I think probably happened 4 years ago, where I made a video actually putting it out there. So I think a lot of it comes from my ability to sit in the tension associated with following through with the inspirations that have been given to me. Byproduct, I have become more and more grounded in my ability to pursue those things.
I agree with you wholeheartedly that the window of tolerance increases when we can sit with the discomfort and be with the pain, right? We process and complete the cycle completely rather than just moving on and disassociating and then it just lingering and sitting in the body, as you know, stuck stored emotions.
Yes.
You've talked a lot about being inspired divinely and allowing yourself to flow within the inspiration and receive kind of intuitively as you move. And I think that there's another piece to talk about, right? So there's like this devotion to being open and receive and really follow in your truth, as comfy or uncomfy as it is. And then there's also this discipline that does have to happen, right? Because as a human living in our 3D matrix, we need to get paid and we need to be resourced and we need to find a way in which we can take and store these inspirations. So obviously you come from a background of being very disciplined. Like that's what got you into the places and spaces where you're even being considered by the chiefs, and you spoke on being a young kid and having this motivation and this discipline. And then you kind of swung into the space where you were really free to like feel and to be and to go deeply into your body. So now how do you marry the two in which you're open to receive, but you don't necessarily pivot all of the time? Because if you know that if you just pivot, you never actually build and compound upon anything, right? And so what does it look like realistically for you to stay with the discomfort, not pivot, but when you become disinterested, like stay in that and know the discernment between this is no longer for me and or this is for me, but I just have to build my resiliency here.
Yeah. So I think the hardest part is being able to understand the difference between the two, right? Is this really not for me, or do I just have to sit in this and, like you said, be able to establish the resilience? And how I discovered my ability to discern the two came from demolishing who I was. So, like I said, being a stripper for 2 months when I first moved to Miami, doing things that were so outside the realm of who I believed I was as a good old boy from South Dakota that was overly humble and didn't like to talk about accomplishments at all and was excessively nice to everybody, probably at the expense of myself, and doing things that were just really outside the realm of who I believed I was. And so by shattering who I believed I was, it allowed me to deconstruct myself in a way where I could learn, okay, what really is of me and what isn't. But most people haven't gone through a deconstruction period, and that can be a little messy. And that's probably why most people don't. And that's probably why they continue to do what they've always done, because of the construction and breaking down and turmoil that it can cause in their life, which it was confusing at times shattering my identity of who I believed I was. So by deconstructing who I believed I was and doing things that were outside the realm of who I thought I was, it's allowed me to have a much more neutral perspective on the inspiration. I don't judge the inspiration as much because I deconstruction my perception of what is good and what is bad, and have allowed myself to see things from a more neutral understanding, which has helped me not condemn things, but be more open to what they really are. So going through a period of deconstruction of who we've been, I think is really fucking important to be able to get in tune with understanding, okay, what really is of me in this inspiration and what isn't. I think that's allowed me to get really clear on what is a true inspiration, which has allowed me to commit to it in a much greater capacity. But if I'm stuck in a way of not really knowing myself at a deeper level, my own biases for how I perceive things, I might judge an inspiration that comes up inside of me as being wrong or bad because of my programmed associations of that thing. So by deconstructing my associations of things, I can see them more neutrally and therefore don't have as much judgment towards things and can have more grace with what comes up inside of me, knowing what is or isn't correct for me. So that builds tremendous conviction in whatever does come up because I don't have the biases towards it, which allows me to stick to it.
I have a question kind of off the cuff, but I'm so intrigued to hear what you will say. So when you work with highly successful men and you help them achieve more success, in a lot of cases, success can be relative. Like they may want to grow their business, but their relationship with their wife is totally stagnant and they don't feel excited or inspired. Maybe they're dating other people. Maybe they are missing their son's hockey games. Like certain types of high achieving males going after the money in the business, but not necessarily addressing I call it like the energetic currency of love. So give and love, receive love, self-love. In those moments, if we are saying that a man can achieve high success, but it takes him time away from the business to put towards something else, like his wife or his kids, are there ever instances where people work with you and it's not necessarily like their bank account rises, but in fact, they take their attention away from business, put it towards something else that will give them true fulfillment and joy, and being okay with success not necessarily meaning it's just money. Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
so absolutely, that's very common. But then normally evens itself out. But what I do with men like that and just people in general is I help develop an association with fixing some of those problems in that if I mend my relationship, then it's naturally going to improve this other area of life. So as high achieving men, what they're going after tends to take the top priority, even if they do have a woman that they really love. And by being able to get them to a point where they're understanding that when they mend that relationship, it will contribute to the betterment of their bigger overall goal. It adds a little more incentive to them to want to put the effort in to do that. So I first have to do that. I first have to create an association with the problem being it contributing to the betterment of their thing that they have going on. Then they can get a little more bought in.
Interesting. That's good for men clients.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You have to be able to meet them where they're at, regard to what they prioritize. So instead of trying to impose onto them what they should prioritize, you help them be able to switch it to where fixing that thing will contribute to what they're prioritizing right now.
Don't you think it has to be, for men, it has to be their idea? So you have to meet them where they're at, kind of help them create a perspective shift that leads them to their own. I mean, every human really, like it's way more profound when you ask me the question to lead to my own truth when I try to interject and get you there on my own, right? But I think for men, when it's their idea to like perhaps start taking off work at 6 and going home, if they're a single male, to start to make and create space for the family that they're so badly after and want, but there's no space in their current reality for. And like I remember that being a topic that I had with my client. And he had this idea. He's like, well, you're right, there's no space. Maybe I'll start going home and shutting down at 7 so that I'm used to that. So that when the wife and the kids come one day, there's like kind of already this blueprint that I've created rather than thinking it's going to magically happen. And that's something that we could all take. But for men, especially, I've noticed that when it's their idea, it just lands a lot.
Yeah, well, I can especially imagine the context of working with a woman as well. I think that would be a little different than working with a man that they respect and admire. So I don't have time for that. Like I don't have time to like dance around and for them to try to understand something. So I just talk shit. Like that's literally what I do. And now I'm kind in my essence, of who I am, but the things that I say, people on the outside looking in be like, this guy's a fucking lunatic. So I'm very upfront and honest and tell them what the fuck they need. And that's why they pay me. I think that's why they like working with me. That's the difference between me and a psychologist or a therapist, is that it's not just a space for them to dump. Because I think men inherently, that can be very toxic for them, just emotionally dumping without having it filled back in by something. And so by first allowing them to like let go of whatever they're bitching about or emotionally is there, by creating a space for them to do that, then it's, I have to fill in that area with something else, and we have to actually solve their problem instead of just letting them just dump. And I think that's the inherent difference between men and women, is I think women just need to dump more than men, and then they can come up with the solution themselves. But I think men are more solution based and need more than just an emotional release. And I understand that. So I think I operate more in that way with them.
I want to ask you more about that because I love understanding men, and I think I'm still confused. So if a man were to emotionally dump, what do you mean by then we would have to fill that with something else?
Yeah, so leaving him in this raw, vulnerable state is not good, because then it's inevitably going to get filled in by something else. So whatever he goes to after our session or call, that'll be what fills in that space. And I want him to feel grounded and not emotionally all over. I think women can more easily pivot through emotion than men. And so if a man goes deep into his emotion, that's not a normal place for him to be, right? So by him grounding himself in something that's sturdy and stable and true before he leaves, it will be very beneficial to him moving forward.
What's an example of how you tie that back? Like you help fill the space or show him how to fill the space without just leaving him there?
By us practically and logically solving his problem. So oftentimes he just needs to get shit out first for us to even get to that point. And then he's then in a position to actually have a more logical conversation. So by him first releasing the emotion, we can go into the logic after.
I mean, I think women are the same way, right? I think we looked at each other when you said that women can pivot faster, because I'm like, women feel like we sit in the emotion, and men can kind of pivot from one thing and shake it off and like kind of convince himself that he's not bothered, right? But that's just it.
That's where it's not actually solved.
Right. So then it's just like being transmuted. Okay, wow. The more you know. One of the questions just said relationships, one of the people. So I'm like, we've talked a lot about that, but I guess in terms of relationships, I don't know. That wasn't very vague. What do you think? Like, as far like, what is the most ideal circumstance for two humans in their wholeness to come together and create and expand? And what does that look like? I don't know if you're single or if you're dating, or I don't know what your relationship status is, but how, if you were single, would you navigate this scene? And what's your thought on relationships in that
Okay,
way?
that was a lot right there.
That was a lot.
Ask me one question within that first.
Well, I don't know, because it says relationships. I'm like, what part? So let's see.
What
Are
questions
these
do you personally have about relationships?
I have a question about when you're in partnership, if you start embodying some of the lessons that you're here to teach, like you learn it through them. And also if sometimes it's tricky in dating because you know so much about women and you have so much experience in the coaching industry, is it hard to turn that off in a relationship?
It can be, for sure. It can be, from the standpoint of having general understandings and realizing there's always exceptions to everything. So just because I have a deep understanding doesn't mean it's always correct for that exact circumstance. And that I think it has been an issue for me personally. And because my mind's always working in a place of understanding the dynamics, I can definitely overanalyze probably at times in my own personal. So because I've trained my brain to like find discrepancies in relationship dynamics, it can sometimes have a hard time shutting that off, and can be looking for those and like having my eyes like be extra vigilant in that way. That can affect me. Yeah.
Do you have any tips? Have you learned any tips that you could share with us on how to turn it off?
Well, this is what I found is, if the foundation of the relationship is set where we agree on our communication styles, we agree on what we want, we agree on our value systems, we agree on the destination that we both want to go, then if that's all set prior to being in the relationship, it's my understanding that I can then allow my mind to relax, not have to try to solve things, because it doesn't need to, because we both want the exact same thing and we're moving towards it. But when there's not value systems that are the same, when there's differences in communication styles and we don't want to go in the same direction together, I'm trying to fix and solve, when in reality, if it was just positioned to work in the first place, then I wouldn't have to be probably trying to solve it. So that's what I like to try to teach people is, before they get into a relationship, really understanding the fundamentals of how they communicate, their value systems. Do they want kids? Do they not? Like, people get into relationships with people that one person wants a kid, the other person doesn't. I'm like, how do you do that? Like, oh, because we enjoy each other's time together? Like, it doesn't make any sense. That can't be a criteria, especially in today's world, to spend a significant amount of time with someone that you want to spend the rest of your life with. Getting along with them most of the time can't be a reason to stay with someone that want to build something with in the long term. Unless you're just dating for fun, then that's okay. But working on the fundamentals of value systems, communication styles, moving in the same direction, wanting the same thing, with that set, then my brain doesn't have to go all over the place, because it's cool. It's good.
I think you nailed it. And I think that's the problem in dating, is people aren't taking the time for the introspection. What are my values? What is it that I clearly want?
Correct.
It's like in business, in relationships, in friendships, if you are unclear on where you stand and what your values are, then you are creating messy energetic leaks all over, and you're letting anybody in your place, and then you're wondering why you find yourself in the same rhythmic pattern. And from two single entrepreneurs that are like, we have done the freaking work and we are like here and we're rooted, I think we're just now finally coming to a space from like, oh, I know exactly what I desire and what I want. And the pool gets smaller, right? Like, it gets a little smaller. There's more discernment to be had, because you're like, I'm clear. I've come to and done the work intuitively to what I need to be met, and how I also get to meet somebody, just because you come into this wholeness. So I think we nailed that one. The second question is, what does Keyen do daily to put himself in a peak mental and emotional state?
That's good.
It's the last one.
Getting good sleep.
Ooh, you love that.
Like, that's like a massive chunk of it, that especially as a very sensitive person and very in tune emotionally person, I have to make sure I'm getting good sleep, because if I'm not, then I'm very conscious, but I notice myself being more volatile emotionally when I don't get good sleep. So that's probably fundamentally like the top one.
Do you have an alarm clock, or do you wake up naturally?
It depends. I like to set one, but I normally always wake up before. But really, it all goes back to my seasonal inspiration. So sometimes I'll wake up at 5 a.m. and sometimes I'll be waking up whenever I want. I normally wake up 6:30 latest anyway. I'm always up between 6:30, but I'm always doing what is most inspiring to me in that season. So I talk about this all the time. When I lived in Brazil, I would make sure that I'm getting my acai in the morning and going to the ocean. And then that's all I needed to do to really get myself ready to jump into the day. But now it's different. So instead of like, everybody talks about the best morning routine with the best things, but I think it's more about tapping into my arsenal of things that I know are good and being aware of what's really aligned with me in that season and doing it. Sometimes I'll go through a season where I'm not meditating at all. And others, I'm going through a season where I am. And this season I'm meditating more than I have in the past. So I've developed a framework where I'm in touch with my inspiration enough to where I don't have any consistent rigidity, but I'm always flowing with the next inspiration and keeping up with that. And that's what keeps me in the peak state. It's staying up to speed with the energy, not trying to control something that isn't meant to stay for longer than it needs to.
Yeah, I love that.
Because I mentally think that it's the best thing for me. Yeah, because inspiration exists beyond our comprehension of these things.
Yeah, it gives you that flow, so you can flow a little bit more with what works for you. I love that. I have two more questions. She might have a question. So my second to last question is, what is your favorite thing to do that's like inner child play that you do now? And maybe you did it as a kid and you just love it. You just get so much energy from it.
Well, I'm a huge rascal. Like, my friends in high school called me the instigator, because I always like to press buttons and see what happens. So I do that with my life, but just things in general. So it's just being a rascal. Like, I was in DC with my girlfriend, and we were by the reflective pool, which is in front of the Lincoln Monument. And we were on a scooter, and she was in front of me and I was behind it. And we played the Rocky, da-da-da, go up behind random joggers, and we play the music. we record them and play it. And then
Oh,
like just stuff like that. So like I'm always doing shit like that. I think I can speak very profoundly, but I'm also just very much a jokester and a prankster too, and do shit like that you would never expect. And I think it's just doing the shit that is fun for me. Like I don't believe I have a gift, but I don't believe in operating in the way that Jesus might have. I operate in the way that I do, and I don't believe there's an identity associated with people that have these types of gifts that they have to follow. It's our job to keep up with who we want to be and who I want to be, not who I think it means that I should be because of the gift that I have. And that's what I do. And I just do fun, stupid shit. Sometimes I'll go on a crazy mushroom trip with some friends. I haven't done that in a little while, but I'll do stuff like that too. So things that the average person would be like, okay, well, this guy definitely doesn't do this, or this. I would probably beg to differ.
Probably surprise you.
Huh?
Could probably surprise them. I love that. I think play is so important in all of this, right? It brings us back. Like, let's just take a chill pill, take a breath, let yourself enjoy, get that pleasure, whatever that is for you, and just allow yourself to exude from there because pleasure amplifies all that you're working towards. And if we leave that part out, that play out, then I think we're missing the punch. We're missing.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, and that's why we have to mend our relationship with desire. Like desire is such a powerful thing to be connected to. And so it's not synonymous with, but it's very similar to the inspirations that we have to mend our relationship with desire. And desire isn't always serious. Desire can be very intimate and goes beyond what we might think is acceptable.
That might be the name of this episode, Mending Your Relationship to Desire, because that encapsulates everything we spoke on. Is like, it's okay to desire, right? But desire from here, like desire from connection, from inspiration. That's good. I like
Yeah,
that.
that's why like the Buddha talked about the middle way. He starved himself, deprived himself of everything, and found that the complete deprivation of desire was not the path. And I believe what he came to terms with is heart fulfilled desire, and pursuing that is the middle path. And sometimes that doesn't feel good. Sometimes it requires discipline, but connecting that place of our deeper sense of inspired desire planted on our hearts by God is the way.
I love that I asked that because there's this freeze frame moment and it's almost like you like shape shifted. And I got to see your little boy for a half second. I'm gonna find the clip and send it to you. You'll have to tell me if that feels real.
Which clip?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. All right.
Which
So
clip?
what?
Oh, just just
The
your
clip of
response.
you
Oh, after I did
laughing.
it. Yeah. No, I felt it for sure.
Yeah. So the last question that we like to ask everybody is the podcast is named Fan into Flame, which is after 2 Timothy 1:6, fan into flame, the gift of God, which is in you through the laying on of my hands. We believe that every person has a very specific gift that God has placed within them. And when they look around, they just notice they can do it really well in comparison to other people, or they notice that it's so unique to them. And you had said gift a few times when you were talking, and I'm just wondering, do you know what that gift could be or one of them?
As far as for myself, probably whatever I do with people, I call it unmasking. So it's like removing the layers of who society and their programming has taught them that they are, and to be able to see themselves as they really are, so they can build a life of success from that foundation of who they are underneath all the masks. So I think that's probably my primary gift that I have, along with probably a lot of secondary, but yeah, it's unmasking, removing the layers of who they're not.
Yeah.
Do
So
you think,
yeah.
oh, so I was gonna say, do you think it's because you make them feel safe? Like,
Yeah.
so that's what it would be, right? Like, is it because you make them feel safe, or is it because you see them first and then you hold that until they see it in themselves? Does that make sense? Or like, what is it about unmasking? Is it your ability to see and perceive people in a way that they can't yet see themselves? Is it that you make them feel really safe? Is it that you're just completely sold out for helping people come back to the truest version of them? Like, that could be the answer. Double clicking into your answer.
No, that's a very complex question. For me to speak with absolute certainty that I know the answer to that, I don't know I could do, but I have speculation that it's that I'm operating from that place. And so, because that's the spout that I'm operating from, it doesn't matter what comes up, right? Like it's the spout, it's not the contents that comes from the spout. And by me living in that place, just being around people, and this is what I say, like when people decide to work with me, they're pairing with me and who I am and receiving that. So their ability to then do the way that I do things and operate in the way that I do naturally as osmosis happens. So you could say it's that I create safety, but I think I create safety through being who I truly am. And so whatever happens as a result of me just being me, then that naturally has the byproduct of it. But that's where I say it's like I don't ever give homework like with people. There's nothing people have to do except show up to our calls. Like that's all they have to do, and they transform. And I think that's the most efficient way because I embody what it is that I teach. So they don't have to go and do extra work outside of our container. They more so just notice themselves shift rather than having to impose any way of being onto themselves. So the fastest way to create a successful business is by embodying and being it. And as osmosis, the people naturally shift and change. And that's what I feel like I do.
That's good. That's really good. Well, thank you so much for just showing up, being willing to let us throw whatever at you, and being so open and receptive to that. We're very excited for this episode to go out and to land on the ears of the people that just resonate with your energy. You know, when she sent me your profile, I was like, done, yes. And you were congruent as you showed up. And that's the biggest compliment that I can give someone is like, hey, you're the same. And my perception of you was real, and you're as good as it looks online, and you really show up in that way. So thank you for being a heart-centered and embodied leader to help high achievers come into their emotional intelligence and grow in capacity, because it's needed and it's a ripple. And the fact that you work with high achievers means that they're directly rippling out into their communities. And it does start with you in many cases. And so thank you for going first and doing that. We're going to share everything about your profile in the notes of this podcast. But is there anything specific that you want to lead the listeners to or let them know about?
Well, first, thank you for all your kind words. I really appreciate that. We live in an odd time where people somehow are not the same as they present themselves as being, which blows my mind. Like, I don't even know how to do that. I'm like, how the fuck do people build this completely separate identity than how they really are? I'm like, that takes a lot of like conscious effort. I'm like, that's wild. But anyway, thank you so much for your kind words. I do appreciate that a lot. And I probably just redirect them back to your guys' pages.
We love that.
Go deeper into y'all's content.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. That means a lot. That's very sweet. And with that being said, let us know. Don't forget to rate and let us know. Well, give us a 5-star if you're going to rate. Don't rate if you're going to give me 4. But rate the podcast. Let us know your biggest takeaway. Tag us, tag Keyen, tag us, and let us know like what you took from this episode, and share it with someone that you know would benefit from this conversation, because there's a lot of gold nuggets in here. We covered a wide variety of topics, and I wish we could have gone a little deeper into each, but also you brought the depth, and there might be a round 2 in the future, who knows. But we're grateful for this conversation today. We're appreciative for all of you listeners who are landing in this space and taking time out of your day to sit in conversation with us and to share in the energy. And just come visit us next week as we have more heart-centered leaders on and just get to go into the vulnerabilities and the depths of their story. Many like Keyen, who are just so embodied in what they do. We are very selective in who we get to interview and share our space with. So everyone that you hear on this podcast is a good example of the leader, and they're walking it out in their real life. So thank you so much for tuning in. We look forward to catching you next week.
Thanks for having me.